Okay, let's start the class then. So we'll continue the chapter transport in plants, and in the last class what we have discussed is we have talked about transpiration, right? We have completed the first portion of the lesson. Next we were talking about transpiration, and what we remember about transpiration. Transpiration is a process in which the plants lose the excess water in the form of water vapor through obviously stomata. As far as types of transpiration is concerned, we have talked about two terms, that is foliar and choline transpiration. What we remember from the two terms is, if you talk about foliar, it is something that's associated with leaves, and if you talk about choline, it is the transpiration that is occurring through stems, right? Next, today what we'll do is, I think we have already written yesterday in the class, types of transpiration we have to discuss. Talking about types of transpiration, we have four types of transpiration, that is lenticular, cuticular, bark transpiration and stomatal transpiration. And as we have discussed, out of these four, so what's a basic transpiration, kuntu processor through obviously stomatal transpiration. Next is, we have talked about certain differences between these types of transpiration. Whenever we talk about stomatal transpiration, we understand that there is a closing and opening mechanism, because we know the stomata remains open generally during the daytime and closes during the night time. So transpiration ketia hobo, jetia khula thakibo tetia transpiration hobo. So stomatal transpiration ki hobo, opening and closing mechanism ase. But if you are talking about the rest three, that is lenticular, cuticular and bark, these type of transpiration, they will never have a closing and opening mechanism. It's something, this is a process that will keep on going or continuing throughout the day and the night. Lenticular transpiration holeo ketia hobo, dinot hobo ne rati hobo, you cannot be asking that question, because it's something that's going to be occurring throughout the time. Rati din boli kotha nai, rati din ketia hoy, jetia opening and closing mechanism thake, right? Okay, so we'll be starting with that. Heading kora first, I think last class ami ki likhisu? Types of transpiration. Now first likha lenticular transpiration. What is lenticular transpiration? The transpiration that occurs through the lenticels are called as lenticular transpiration. As far as what is lenticell, who forms or where will you find the lenticels, detailed description has been given in plant anatomy. But in spite of that, whenever we hear the word lenticell, what we understand, lenticell ki hoy, these are nothing but loosely arranged parenchyma tissues, right? Loosely arranged parenchyma tissues, tar through ki hoy, exchange of gases hoy, and where they are found, they are generally or they are most commonly found in stems, right? We'll be talking about it in anatomy, but apart from stems, there are some other areas also where the lenticels are found. Especially we have to talk about the ripened fruits, right? Fruits or to ki thake lenticels thake. Lenticels commonly available kot stem ba barkot, right? Jehetu this is a very common point that everyone know about it. He karne the question has never been asked as to lenticell is commonly found in, right? That eta question ahe, lenticell is found in jodi question ahe, that option of ki thakibo fruits, and it's always on that point the question has been asked, right? Because we know the lenticels are present in the stem, kintu fruits or to je thake he point to pora question ahise, right? So it's just two lines about lenticels likha. So if this is over, number 4 लिखिएगा stomatal transpiration, and this is something that we have to discuss in details. Read about the percentage of water loss in case of lenticular and in case of cuticular. Cuticular transpiration, as the name suggests, transpiration occurs through the cuticle, right? What is a cuticle? The upper layering cells that is found in the epidermis of stems and leaves is called as cuticle. সেইটোৱেতো কৈ আছোঁ, does not have opening and closing mechanism মানে lenticels বিলাক সদায় open থাকে। হা? ট্ৰান্সপিৰেশ্যন কেনেকৈ হয়? ট্ৰান্সপিৰেশ্যনটো যেতিয়া প'ৰটো অ'পেন থাকিব তাৰ পৰাই ট্ৰান্সপিৰেশ্যন হ'ব। পানীবিলাক যেতিয়া চেলত থাকিব, চেলটোৰ পৰা ওলাই আহিব লাগিব নালাগে? চ' ওলাই আহিবলৈ লেণ্টিচেলছৰ পৰা কি হয়, পানীটো ওলাই যায় ইন দ্য ফৰ্ম অফ ৱাটাৰ ভেপাৰ। যদি লেণ্টিচেলছবিলাক বন্ধ হৈ থাকে তেতিয়াহ'লেতো ওলাই নাযাব ন। ষ্টমাটাৰ কি হয়, ট্ৰান্সপিৰেশ্যন অকল ডিউৰিং দ্য ডে এণ্ড নট ডিউৰিং দ্য নাইট, ৰাইট? কিহৰ কাৰণে? কাৰণ ষ্টমাটাৰ ৰাতি বন্ধ হৈ থাকে। চ' ইফ ইউ হেভ আ প'ৰ, থ্ৰু দ্যাট প'ৰ এক্সচেঞ্জ অফ গেছ উইল টেক প্লেচ। চ' ইফ দ্য প'ৰ keeps on, I mean, or if the pore has a opening and closing mechanism, মানে কি এবাৰ বন্ধ হ'ব এবাৰ খুলিব, তেতিয়াহ'লে তাৰ কি হ'ব? যেতিয়া খুলিব তেতিয়া ট্ৰান্সপিৰেশ্যন হ'ব, যেতিয়া বন্ধ হ'ব তেতিয়া ট্ৰান্সপিৰেশ্যন নহয়। লেণ্টিচেলছবিলাকৰ তেনেকুৱা কোনো অ'পেনিং এণ্ড ক্ল'জিং মেকানিজম নাই, সদায় খোলাই থাকে। Stomatal transpiration occurrence details. As the name suggests, we know that this type of a transpiration occurs through stomata. What are stomata? Small openings on the epidermis is called as stomata because we have already studied this, no? The stomata to kuntu tissue system of bhitor pore, it is a what? Stomata belongs to which tissue system? It belongs to epidermal tissue system. Kihor karone? Karon epidermis ot thake. Here are common points ketaman likhi lo. Some of the points. Okay, as far as the structure of a stomata is concerned, we know that stomata consists of a pore that is surrounded by two cells, those are called as guard cells. As far as the shape of the guard cell is concerned, it is different in case of dicot and in case of monocot. We will be discussing that. Kidney shaped or bean shaped, duta type of guard cell or structure, we will be talking about that. As of now, so we have a pore surrounded by two cells that are called as guard cells. Guard cells are surrounded by some other cells and these cells are called as subsidiary cells, right? Now, if you are talking about stomata, we have already discussed that stomata belongs to epidermal tissue system. So, if stomata belongs to epidermal tissue system, if the question is asked, guard cell is an example of dash tissue, epidermal, right? So, if you are talking about guard cell will be epidermal, and if you are talking about subsidiary cells also, these are also epidermal. But there is a difference between the subsidiary cells and the guard cells. Normal epidermal cells or guard cells are at a basic difference. What is the basic difference? The presence of chloroplast, right? If you see in the subsidiary cells, chloroplast 9, kintu chloroplast code ase guard cells of ase. So that is the point that you have to remember, right? Next point. This part is over. Next point, please. এইটোৰ ওপৰত কোৱেশ্যন আহিছে দেই, কোনটো লেছ ইলাষ্টিক আৰু কোনটো মোৰ ইলাষ্টিক। Okay, talking about stomata, stomata ক'ত থাকিব? Epidermisত থাকিব. If you talk about monocots, dicots, in both the cases you will see the stomata. We have used two terms, uniformly distributed or non-uniformly distributed. What we understand by these two terms? Uniformly distributed or non-uniformly distributed talks about what? Generally, আমি যেতিয়া stomatar কথা কওঁ, no, we know something, no? Stomata is more on the dash side of a leaf. It is statement to agote porisa sake, no? Stomata bilak generally we talk from the point of key dicots, right? If you are talking about a dicot, that ki pam leafot to obviously stomata pam. Stomata basically kot thake on the upper side of the leaf ne lower side of the leaf. It is always on the lower side of the leaf that the stomata is more, right? So that is what is called as non-uniform. If the upper side or jiman thake, lower side or himan thake, that is what is called as uniform, right?
Question has been asked about this point. Yate dumbbell shape or kidney shape tomorrow rakiba ha. Kidney shape and dumbbell shape I think we know na. Since we are talking about stomata, aru eta bostu poribo lage. As far as stomatal index is concerned, calculations has never been asked. Kintu formula to question ahibo pare. They identify the formula that indicates or that will help us to estimate the stomatal index. Stomatal index tells us what? It talks about the number of stomata that is present in a particular leaf,
right? So eta leafot to bahut stomata thakibo pare no, around 1000 to 6000 as we have already mentioned, right? So if you want to go for calculation purpose, so this is how we do. We have to calculate the stomata, we have to count the epidermal cells also. Per epidermal cell ot kiman stomata ase into 100 will give you the number. Calculation nalage khali ei bostu to monot rakhibo lagibo. And as far as the percentage, since I have already said that we need to remember the percentage, cuticular transpiration kiman asile 10%, lenticular ki asile 0.1%, and if you are talking about this one, it's 90%. Next part, we have to talk about the types of stomata. Types of stomata boli kole, it is not only that kidney shaped and the dumbbell shaped stomata we are talking about. As far as different plants are concerned, no, hey, plants bilakor leaves bilakor kot stomata, either it is uniformly present or it is present only on the upper side or it is present only on the lower side, depending on certain things like distribution, depending on another thing like opening and closing, right? Kisuman factors or heading out, types of stomata kini poribo lagibo. So we'll make a chart about that. If this is over, heading kora types of stomata. Potamogeton, it is a water plant. So, on the basis of where they are found, the terms could be hypostomatous, amphistomatous, epistomatous and astomatous. Hypo, epi, these are the words that we already know, no? Upor thake ne tolot thake. If you are talking about amphi, we understand the meaning, that's both, right? And if you are talking about astomatous, obviously it is absence of vestigial. Vestigial mane ase kintu kamot nai. That is what is called as vestigial. It's present but it does not do the function. That is what is called as vestigial. So, generally if you talk about astomatous condition, which type of plants are we could we take it to as an example? It's always the water plants, and water plants puli kole, hydrophytes puli kole, it's not all the hydrophytes that do not have stomata. Hydrophytes are categories ase no, jeneke free floating asile, submerged asile, rooted submerged asile, totally submerged asile. So generally if you talk about submerged no, tahator ki na thake, stomata na thake. And some of the hydrophytes like lotus, Victoria, etc. Victoria ki hoy? Victoria lily. Victoria lily kot porisa? Living World dot. Living World dot ki porisa? Botanical Garden. Calcutta Botanical Garden or one of the main attraction, right? Apart from the banyan tree. The leaves are very large, no? Eta baby thoi dibo pari mane dangor. It's very big. Okay. So this is the first type of classification. If this is over, we'll go to the next one on the basis of subsidiary cells. Etu likhi lua. Is this over? You have to know the names, okay? Okay. Meaning of stomatus, meaning of amphi, epi, hypo. Naam kita monot rakhiba. এটা কাম কৰাচোন সাবসিডিয়ারি সেলসৰ ক্লাসিফিকেশনটো নালাগে কাৰণ এটো জেনাৰেলি আহা নাই third will go for the next one So on the basis of opening and closing type, we have certain types. So what's a common kunda? Obviously this one, it opens during the daytime and closes during the night time. Next is, out of this part now, question has been asked about this word, amphibious plants. So what is the amphibious plants? Amphibian meaning to janu, so that's the same meaning. Both land and water যদি grow করিব পারে, those plants are called as কি amphibious plants. One example of an amphibious plant is equisetum. Equisetum we have already studied. It was also called as ki horsetails, no, pteridophyte. ইমান বেছি ডিটেইলছত মুখস্থ কৰিব নালাগে, ঠিক আছে. If you see what I have ticked is just one point, right? এইটো one আছিলে, okay. Hold it up. Photoactive, hydroactive. PH or TO? Maki likhilo. Photoactive. Light porile khulibo. And scotoactive, we have already talked about it in our CAM cycle. Crassulacean acid. Tate ami ki paisilo? CAM plants kisman paisilo? Give me an example of a CAM plant. Bryophyllum, very good. Bryophyllum, alloy, agave, eblak ki hoy? Succulent, no? Succulent xerophytes. And what about epiphytes? Epiphyte is an example. Venda. Yeah, generally some type of orchids could be epiphytes, right? Some type of lichens could also be epiphytes. Epiphytes mean the plants that grows on top of other plants are called as epiphytes. And whenever we talk about epiphytes, especially special type of epiphyte like Vanda, do you remember a special type of tissue that is present in its roots? Very good, velamen. That is present in case of a hygroscope. I mean, it has a hygroscopic nature, no? Water absorb koribo pare copra from the moisture, I mean atmosphere itself. So this is all about stomata. So since we have to talk about stomatal transpiration, we have talked about the structure of the stomata. How does it look like? Guard cells or epidermal cells or difference ki hetu porhilu. The shape of the guard cell in case of dicots and monocots we have studied, and the next point is something called as the sunken stomata. Sunken stomata is a characteristic of which plants? Obviously the xerophytes. Right? Why is it called as sunken? Because normal stomata bilak ko thake, epidermis ekdom surface of thake, kintu sunken buli kole it's deep inside, right? So that the loss of transpiration or the loss of water is less, right? Make sure to check the rate of transpiration. Next is stomata ketaman type porhilu kisuman terms porhilu. Now as far as the process is concerned, no, stomata pora ki hoy transpiration hoy. Transpiration hoar process to kenekua. When will a stomata lose water or pani lobo ne pani eri dibo? No, again that same concept that we have been studying. It depends on what? It depends on the amount of solute that is present. So if you talk about a stomata, it has a pore, and it is through this pore that the water vapor goes out, right? So eta plant ase, plantor cell ase, cello epidermal cell to bitor stomata ase. Stomata ki kore pani eri diye. Where does this water goes? Pani to eri diye, no? Pani to kole eri dibo. First, it does not go directly to the atmosphere. First it goes to the intercellular spaces. Intercellular space or pora tahle ki hoy atmosphere le gusi jay, right? So pore ase, pani to kot humabo first guard cell. Guard cell, if it becomes, again we will be using those words called as turgid. If it becomes turgid, it will exert the pressure. If it exerts the pressure, the elliptical pore will open and the water will come out. It comes out what? Comes out to the intercellular spaces by which process? By the process of diffusion. More to less. Diffusion hai hobo, right? So we will be talking about mechanism of transpiration heading kora. Right? So if you are talking about mechanism, we don't have to write, bostu to just janile hol. Stomata to open korile ki hobo, pani khini loss hobo. Stomata to open ketia koribo, jetia guard cells e pani lobo. Guard cells e pani ketia lobo, jetia solutes besi hobo. Right? So in other way around, what you can say, if transpiration is going on, tetia hale ki hobo, the cells will have lack of water. Jodi lack of water hoy, tetia hale besi ki thakibo, solutes. Right? So solutes besi thakile DPD ki hobo, barhi jabo, and when there is high DPD, then obviously the water will be taken in. We have already talked about a term that is called as suction pressure, right? So transpiration hobo, transpiration hoar karone water content komibo, cell tut ki thakibo, solutes besi ke thakibo, solutes besi ke thaka karone ki hobo, osmotic pressure obviously high hobo, DPD obviously high hobo, and as a result, because of these two factors, they will take in the water. Once they have taken the water will have to evaporate, or it has to move to the intercellular spaces, from where by the process of diffusion it will go to the atmosphere, right. This is in general. Talking about what exactly happens in the guard cell, because we see that it is the guard cell that will, on the basis of which the water will come out or it will go. So, main activity car obviously of the guard cell. So, there were two mechanisms to explain the opening and closing of the stomata. So, guard cell no kenekwa key factors hoy jar karone hi pani loy. So, we have to talk about that. Various scientists from time to time have tried to explain the mechanism, but we are not going to read everything except two. We will be studying something called as a sugar starch hypothesis. Our second is the role of proton in opening and closing of the stomata. I think by now you know, since we have already talked about those mineral nutrition, I mean that macro and micro. When we were talking about potassium, I mean it has a major role in opening and closing of the stomata. So, duta bostu ami porim sugar starch hypothesis. Some scientists said that because of sugar starch interconversion, opening and closing of stomata takes place. Aru kisumane ki koisile, it is the role of proton. Which proton are we talking about? K positive. So, what they said, K positive jodi guard cell or humai, the solute content will increase, and as a result opening of the stomata and loss of water. So, ei duta porhim. Out of this, sugar starch hypothesis is a word that we are using. Since we are talking about it as a hypothesis and not a theory, what is the basic difference? Hypothesis or theory difference ki? Theory hole fact thakibo, factual. Hypothesis assumption. Enukwa hoy sake. That is what is called as hypothesis, right? So, tat likha two mechanisms or proton transport concept or proton concept theory, whatever you say, the role of proton. এই দুটা পঢ়িব লাগিব তাৰ ফাৰ্ষ্ট হেডিং কৰিবা sugar starch hypothesis হেতু হেডিং কৰি will start that. Right? It's also called as Sayre-Stewart or Stewart-Sayre hypothesis. Whenever you hear this word, then you have to know that we are talking about the interconversion between sugar and starch. Right? So they tried to explain as to the transpiration keneke hoy. Transpiration hobo lagile the stomata needs to open, right? So they tried to explain the opening and closing mechanism of stomata, right? So opening and closing mechanism or right? So what did they say? He said that there are certain activities that occur during the daytime and certain activities that occur during the night time in the guard cells, and because of which the guard cell will either take in water or release water, right? So etu theory, etu hypothesis ki koise, they tried to explain the opening and closing. What he said, কিছুমান ৰিয়াকশ্যনছ হয়, কেতিয়া ৰিয়াকশ্যনছ হয়, দিনত কিছুমান ৰিয়াকশ্যনছ হয়, ৰাতি কিছুমান ৰিয়াকশ্যনছ হয়, কিছুমান ৰিয়াকশ্যনৰ কাৰণে গাৰ্ড চেলে পানী লয়, কিছুমান ৰিয়াকশ্যনছৰ কাৰণে গাৰ্ড চেলে পানী এৰি দিয়ে। যদি গাৰ্ড চেলে পানী এৰি দিয়ে, দেন অবভিয়াছলি দ্য প'ৰ উইল ক্ল'জ ডাউন, এণ্ড ইফ দ্য গাৰ্ড চেল টেক ইন ৱাটাৰ ইট উইল বিকাম টাৰ্জিড। তাৰপিছত ইলাষ্টিক মেমব্ৰেইন আছে ন, সেই কি কৰিব, খুলি যাব, ৰাইট? So what did he say? Details as far as his way of explaining is concerned, মই points বিলাক লিখি দিম, কিন্তু কোনটো point important from examination point of view we'll study. It is mostly the drawbacks that we have to study, right? মই পঢ়াই দিম পিছত. So what he said, they said that So what he said during the night, so as far as these sentences are concerned, details you don't have to study. What is the proper mechanism that is occurring inside the guard cell, also you don't have to study. The only statement that you have to study from the lines that we have written is, when a stomata opens, the guard cell will have a higher pH or a lower pH, or a stomata opens during increased pH or decreased pH. It is stomata to khuli thakile guard cell or pH to hodai besi hoi thake. Jedi guard cell or pH besi hoy tetiahe stomata to open koribo. So that is just the line that you see. How does the activity occur? Keneke concentration, hydrogen ion concentration bari gol, pH ki hole afterwards, but sorry, lower ho gol. Ebilak bostu iman details on nalage. So what we need to remember is if we are talking about a open stomata বা opening of a stomata, তেতিয়াহলে কেতিয়া open koribo? Tete pH to high thakibo. Quote, obviously in the guard cells, right? Next is the role of a particular enzyme. So kisuman reactions hobo lagile, kisuman to enzymes lagibo, no? So what he said is during the daytime phosphorylase enzyme to activate hole, what it does is it breaks down the starch into glucose. Starch korpra ahile. We are talking about opening and closing of the stomata, so the cell that we are concerned with is obviously guard cell. Now we are talking about starch also. What is the relation between starch and the guard cell? Guard cell or starch korpra ahile. Starch ki hoy product of photosynthesis. Guard cell or starch keneke ahile. We have already discussed now guard cell or ki thake the difference between a normal epidermal cell and a guard cell presence of the chloroplast, right? So jedi chloroplast ase tat to photosynthesis hoise, jedi photosynthesis hoise after dark reaction the food that is produced is in the form of ki starch. What happens to starch? During the night time it remains there in the leaf itself, stored hoye thake. It is only following morning in presence of light that it starts to break down. Starch needs to get broken down into simple sugars and only then it could be transported from cell to cell. In the form of starch, the food cannot be transported from cell to cell because it's an example of a complex sugar, polysaccharide hoy. Hekane polysaccharide to carry koribo noare, polysaccharide to ki hobo, lower forms monosaccharide, disaccharide eba kole convert hobo libo. So a conversion process to ketia hoy once the light falls, right? So iman details to yat describe kora nai, yate ki korise je during the light or during the daytime eta enzyme activate hoy, enzyme to ketia activate hoy jete increase thake pH to, right? Enzyme to activate hobo, enzyme to ki koribo, the starch that was present in the guard cell bhangi pelai ki form koribo? Glucose, right? Again, reactions you don't have to remember, right? It is just a way of showing that what happens to starch, starch gets converted to glucose, right? Starch glucose wale convert kune kore at a special enzyme, enzyme to upor eku question aha nai. So we have started our discussion from the guard cell because opening and closing is related with which cell? It's obviously related with the guard cell. So in the guard cell, starch was present. And later in the daytime, rati ki asile guard cellot starch asile, dinot ki thakile glucose plus phosphate. Now according to them, what they have done is, prothomote ki asile starch, etia ki ase glucose and phosphate. Glucose and phosphate, according to them, what they said is two solutes. Agote ki asile one solute guard cellot, etia guard cellot ki ase two solutes. When the solutes has increased, baki into ami janu. right? So formation of glucose and phosphate in the guard cells has increased the solute concentration. So ultimately it has increased the osmotic pressure of the guard cell, the DPD has increased, water potential has decreased, and so the guard cell will take in water, it will become turgid, it will get swollen up, and the stomatal pore will open. Okay. The guard cells will take in water, no? Etu nilikhi pelai, we can talk about that osmosis also. Guard cell or ki hoise, take in water process to kami ki boli ko, endoosmosis. So endoosmosis takes place in the guard cell, because of that it becomes turgid, and so ultimately. This was the explanation that they have forwarded as far as opening of the stomata is concerned. Next we have to discuss as to what happens that leads to the closing of the stomata. Kiba eta hobo lagibo, hobo ki lagibo, solute content to ki hobo lagibo, komi jabo lagibo, right? Because we know whenever the solute is more, it will take in water, whenever the solute is less, it will withdraw water, right? So let's write it down. Okay, if photosynthesis occurs, what will you say about the level of carbon dioxide? And if photosynthesis does not occur, what will you say about the level of carbon dioxide or the amount of carbon dioxide in the cell? Photosynthesis hole carbon dioxide to accept koribo, loi lobo no, titehe photosynthesis hobo. So that means what? It lowered the level, right? If photosynthesis does not occur, then obviously carbon dioxide was already present in the cell, so the concentration increased, right? কোৱাচোন কোনখিনি এইটো বস্তু ওকে চোৱা ষ্টমাটাটো ওপেন কৰা বা বন্ধ হোৱা কাৰ এক্টিভিটিৰ থ্ৰুৰে হয় গাৰ্ড সেলৰ ষ্টমাটা বুলি ক'লে আমি এইটো এটা পোৰ দিস ইজ দ্য ষ্টমাটা হয় নে নহয় stomata comprise of what? Stomata comprise of the guard cell, it comprise of the pore, right? এই প'ৰটোক আমি কি বুলি কওঁ stomatal pore হা এই প'ৰটোৰ থ্ৰুৰে কি হয় ৱাটাৰখিনি ওলাই যায় right এই প'ৰটোৰ থ্ৰুৰে ৱাটাৰ ওলাই যাব লাগিলে ৱাটাৰটো ক'ৰ পৰা ওলাই যাব গাৰ্ড চেলৰ পৰা ৱাটাৰটো ওলাই যাব লাগিলে প্ৰথমতে গাৰ্ড চেলে পানী ল'ব লাগিব নালাগে লাগিব সো গাৰ্ড চেলে পানী কেতিয়া ল'ব আমিতো অলৰেডি পঢ়িছো এটা চেলে পানী কেতিয়া লয় যেতিয়া কনসেন্ট্ৰেচন অফ সলিউটস ইনক্ৰিজেস সো দিনত কি হয় কিছুমান এক্টিভিটিজ হয় কি এক্টিভিটিজ হয়তো আমি দেখালুৱে স্টাৰ্চ কি হলে কনভাৰ্ট হৈ গৈছে গ্লুকোজ আৰু ফসফেটলে সো গ্লুকোজ ফসফেট সেপাৰেট হৈ গৈছে সো সলিউট কন্টেন্টটো বাঢ়ি গৈছে বুলি কৈছে অ্যাকৰ্ডিং টু ষ্টিৱাৰ্ড এণ্ড চাইৰে right so jetia prothomote when we have started the experiment no if you are talking about guard cell ot ki asile starch etu ketia asile night ot next when we are talking about the experiment no during the day guard cell ot ki thakile glucose plus phosphate etu ketia hoise de to etu consider ki korise one solute etu consider ki korise two solutes so jetia yate solute concentration besi hol tar side or jintu subsidiary cell ase tar pora pani lobo noloy robo subsidiary cell to belek cell opra pani ahise pani to xylem or move koriye thakibo হয় না সো সাবসিডিয়ারি সেলৰ পৰা গাৰ্ড সেলত গৈছে গাৰ্ড সেলৰ পৰা আলটিমেটলি কি হৈছে প'ৰটোৰ থ্ৰুৰে ওলাই গৈছে কোলে গৈছে ইন্টাৰসেলুলাৰ স্পেচলে আৰু তাৰ পৰা কোলে গৈছে এটমস্ফিয়াৰলে right so if what we are writing is because of the increase in solute how did the solute increase because we have seen glucose and phosphate present in the guard cell যেহেতু solute increase কৰিছে হি পানী ল'ব নে নলয় ল'ব so process to আমি কি বুলি কম পানী লোৱা process to আমি কি কম osmosis again of two types no exo or endo so jehetu guard cell e pani loise so that process is called as what endo if the guard cell takes in water tete hale ki hobo turgid hoi jabo na jay remember something called as the turgor pressure right so turgid hobo turgid mane ki the swollen condition is called as turgid so pani loi ase pani to release no kore guard cell to phati jabo dokhon right so ultimately what happens it take in the guard water it will become turgid and ultimately it will release the water আর রিলিজ কেনেকৈ কৰিব পৰটো সো দুটা সেল আছে হা এটো এটা সেল এনেকৈ একদম পুৰা আঠা লাগি আছে ধৰা মাজত এটা পৰ আছে হা এটো সেল বা এটো সেলত যেতিয়া পানীটো বেছি হ'ব তাতে ফুলি যাব না যায় ফুলি গলে এই পৰটো খোলা যাব না যায় বুজি পাইছা যদি পানী নাই তেতিয়াহ'লে দুইটা সেপেটা হৈ থাকিব আৰু প্লাস তোমাৰ পৰটো বন্ধ হৈ থাকিব যেতিয়া তোমাৰ পানী বেছি হ'ল এপিনেও পানী বেছি হ'ল এপিনেও বাছি হ'ল এটা ফুলি গৈ থাকিব এক্সটেন্ড হ'ব নহয় extend hole the pore will get open and the water will get released right hexokinase agote khunisa ne nai khuna where glycolysis right yeah so glucose to bhangi dibo respiration of first step of glycolysis case glucose breaking down into GIP right oh sorry glucose 1 phosphate into glucose 6 phosphate and then the process okay so again the same thing So during the night, what happens? Photosynthesis does not occur, carbon dioxide increases, pH decreases, and at low pH, at high pH, there was the activity of a particular enzyme. Yato, at low pH, there is a particular activity of a particular enzyme. So low pH, hexokinase ki kore, the glucose that was present, bhangi dibo. Bhangi di ultimately ki ho jabo, they form starch also. So this interconversion, ki hole convert hoise sugar ever starch hole convert hoise, starch ever sugar le convert hoise, according to Stewart side, right? And again the same explanation, guard cellot ki asile, glucose or phosphate, etia ki asile, starch. So prothomete duta solute asile, etia eta solute. So reduction in solutes. So ultimately osmotic pressure came down, DPD came down, water potential increased. As a result, the guard cell will release water, becomes flaccid, and the stomatal pore will get closed, right? A first line to hoisile ne? A good activity bilak koto ase guard cells of ase. So it is again that same line. Jedi solute besi pani lobo, jedi solute kom pani withdraw koribo. That's all. This is one hypothesis, and moreover, since it's a hypothesis, it does not have any proof. Second point, it is not accepted also. Why is it not accepted? So obviously, it has certain types of drawbacks. Key drawback ase, I think we can do it in the next class, right? So in the next class, we will be talking about the drawbacks of this hypothesis and proton concept theory and the remaining part of the lesson. All right. I think that's all for today. Thank you.